original.
From Story Studio Network.
The Fox News Decision Desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th President of the United States.
Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president. And for so many of you watching right now, that news is, to say the least, a lot to digest.
It is now official. CNN projects that Donald Trump has been elected president, defeating Vice President Kamala Harris and making a political comeback unlike any.
And CBS News now projects that Donald Trump is the winner in Wisconsin. That gives him the number of electoral votes he needs to become the 47th president of the United States.
Yeah, you heard it right. Did that CBS anchor sound like she needed a back rub while she was making that announcement last night? Or early this morning, I guess, is more of the point. Here we are. It's Now and Next. And it is the morning after of the reckoning. You know, in 2016, we all kind of woke up after the election night and thought, holy shit, what happened? We didn't see that coming. Well, you know what? In this case, we kind of saw it coming. And so here we are on the verge of the second presidency that will be Donald Trump. He is the 47th president-elect now and ready to take office on the 20th of January. So it's actually good timing that we've got our comms and strategy team all set to go around the table here on Now and Next. And, well, Lindsay Broadhead is here this morning. And, of course, Bob Reed is in the house, Anne-Marie Aikens, and we've dropped an F-bomb in there. We figured there may be a few. So just a warning, if you're triggered by the F-bomb, there may be a few this morning. And Brad Ross, of course, with us this morning. And we want to kind of get around to the larger conversation around, you know, how is it that we got to this point? But I just kind of want your just initial takes. Bob, what about you?
Well, I was surprised. I was surprised at not necessarily the final outcome. I mean, it was possible that Trump could do it, but it was interesting as the night unfolded and watching the returns and a couple of squares on my drinking game where it's still very early, it's too close to call, and blue wall was my right bower. But as things unfolded, what I noticed really quickly was there were no surprises. And the late campaign narrative that was at play out there was that we could maybe expect some surprises. There was this notion that the wheels had fallen off Trump's campaign, that it was collapsing, that there was a real sense of panic within his team about how the numbers were looking, that he was seeming tired, he was seeming almost defeated, that Harris had the momentum. So I was anxiously looking for some signs of some surprise. And what did we see instead? Trump was competitive everywhere, and especially in the battleground states that he needed to be throughout the course of the night. There was no massive surprise on the Harris side of things. It's not like there was no holy shit moment. Look, she won that state. We didn't see that coming. None of that happened. And so the longer it went on, the more that the numbers lined up, that fleeting narrative that fasten your seatbelts, there could be some real surprises, didn't happen. And then it got very surprising to me watching the popular vote numbers, because let's remember in 2016, Trump lost the popular vote, but won the presidency thanks to the Electoral College math. This time around, he won decisively in the popular vote as well as the Electoral College.
Lindsay?
Well, to build off of what Bob was saying, this for me was, I was worried about a vote that wouldn't be definitive. I was worried about the consequences of being too middling and too close. This was not that. It was a definitive vote. And I think it was a definitive vote for definitive action. And I'm sure we'll get into messaging shortly. But Trump served up clear, concise, action-oriented items on his to-do list. And I think what sits underneath that is, this ain't about truth. This ain't about who delivers the message. It's about the story. It's the story of hope and a promise, I think, for an American dream that is slipping away. That's debatable perhaps, but it's this story that was served up that voters top to tip in that country leaned into. And I think it has really interesting potential implications for Canada as well.
Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Lindsay on the storytelling piece. I think the myth of the man, that savior, the Messiah, who with all the character flaws, we heard over and over again, his supporters acknowledged his character flaws, but they didn't care. And I think this was more than Donald Trump. Now it became 4 years of people believing that that inflation was affecting them, and of course it was in many ways. But they really just grew tired of I think of the current administration, and I'm sure we'll get into all the flaws in Biden taking so long to step down, and that here we are now. I got to ask, if the Democrats stole the 2020 election, why didn't they steal this one then? Because it just, it's not making sense for me. And I think most Americans don't believe the Democrats stole 2020. They liked what Trump was saying as much as in terms of his policies, air quotes for people not watching. So there's my hot take.
Anne-Marie?
Well, if you ask me, the question I think was what was my initial reaction, and it was, of course, an emotional reaction. I have lots of fears and anxieties and worries about what this means, and but the last week I started to suspect that the Harris government the Harris team was starting to was underestimating completely just how pissed off people were, and upset and scared and afraid since 2020. And I talk about it a lot, and I know people don't want to talk about it, but the post-pandemic reality for the how people are feeling and the economy and that impact on people's daily lives. They just know that they didn't have these issues when Trump was in power. They aren't connecting it to the fact that we had a global pandemic, but they are connecting it to that he just was, a magician, and he's going to fix all of their problems. But I think the one thing I want to say before I forget is that what I really learned this last week was that pollsters and pundits, including all of us, are really talking out of our ass. We have no idea. And we really have to look at what pollsters are doing and how they're reaching the silent voters, that they aren't reaching them. So the polls are wrong all the time, but we seem to, we report on all of them. We talk about all of them all of the time. And that informs a lot of what pundits say. And as a result, they're so wrong. We're all wrong.
Well, let me suggest for a second that we in the media, generally writ large, have looked at polling as being predictive. And, if there's ever been an opportunity to say this out loud over and over and over again, it was now. They are not predictive. You will all know that you have done your own level of research, and it's a snapshot of what's happening in the moment we ask the question. And to your point, Anne-Marie, some of the people are just going to say, fuck off, I don't want to talk about it, or they're not going to tell you the truth, or whatever it might be. But to suggest for a second that polling is at a level where it can be predictive, it's not. And, so that's my big issue with a lot of that conversation. The other side of it is, media only talked about the polls, Bob. That's all they talked about through this entire campaign since Harris took over as the nominee for the Democrats. What do the polls say? What do the polls say? Well, the polls say that was the narrative out of the gate. There was no substantive reporting that went on in any real way around this campaign.
Well, it's always been an entrenched part of the coverage of election campaigns. So there's a certain amount of rote that comes into play there about what are the polls saying. And the other thing that happens is very quickly is message fatigue. I mean, whether it was Trump or Harris, they both got really boring really quickly, because it was the same thing time and time again. Any Trump rally speech, you knew what he was going to say. You knew what he was going to drone on about. Harris was really no different. That, with her focus on bringing people together and ending division and uplifting everybody together, it was a nice narrative theme, but it didn't have any traction. This was, first and foremost, about the economy, stupid, as the Bill Clinton winning campaign of the 90s successfully identified. And it was also about change from the current situation, change from the status quo. And Harris failed to present herself as a real agent of change. Instead, she presented herself as the alternative to Donald Trump in a referendum on, do you want Donald Trump to be president again? And that's where the Democrats really strategically missed, I think, because what people were thinking about is, how is everything so fucking expensive? And why do I feel like I'm not getting anywhere? And then they hear Trump saying, hey, remember when I was in office? Remember how good things were then? I can do that again. I can do that in a heartbeat. And a lot of people bought into it.
Well, here's the problem. And I think Bob nails it, Anne-Marie, because I heard the surrogates for the Democrats last week alone talking about, the young black men voting and black women voting, et cetera, and all this stuff, and how they were worrying about leakage to the GOP. And, one of the senior Democrats was saying, well, we just have to connect the dots with them. And I'm screaming at the television saying, you're connecting the wrong fucking dots. They've got dots out there that don't matter to people. And that was the downfall. I convinced it's got nothing to do necessarily with how well Trump resonated with the nation generally. It's that they had blinders on from the word go, whether it was Biden or Harris in the chair.
I think you're right, and to a certain extent, I think they're absolutely right. I think Trump, his politics were about grievance politics. So he fed into that's the one thing they must have really appreciated and got, that on a ground level, people are worried, just like in Canada, worried about their housing and worried about their jobs and worried about why can't they pay for things? Why at the end of this month I have no money left over? And 5-6 years ago, I did have money left over. So nobody connected it to the pandemic, and least of all Trump. He didn't want to do that because he wanted to put the blame for why they were in the economic state they're in into the Biden administration, where countries around the world, that lockdown, that impact on the economy is going to be felt for years. And we're going to come out of it, and we are starting to come out of it. And then Trump will be able to own that as well. So I think what, his politics are all about everything is bad, everything is broken, and I'm the one to fix it. Where Harris was trying to counter that with this positive view of the U.S. is the greatest country in the world, and we all love each other, and which discounted the way people are actually feeling. So I think they just held their nose in spite of Trump and went for the Republican policies and decided there's a fix there, where the same administration is just not it's just going to continue to make things worse for me.
Well, Brad, I think to some degree, we want to throw around the word and the phrase policy. We want to talk about platforms and all of that. I don't think that the general electorate, whether it's in this country or stateside, is getting down to, well, what's Donald Trump's policy on, the central bank or whatever it might be. I don't think there's a whole lot of vigorous conversation going on among
there's
the general
concepts of
public.
policies, Dave. There's concepts of policies.
There's a concept of policies. So I just think that he, say what you will about him, he was smart enough in 2016, smart enough in 2024 to say, this is what is pushing an emotional button with people, and I'm just going to keep pushing that bloody button, and that's landed him back in the White House.
Exactly.
For sure. I think, you talk about connecting the dots. I think the Harris campaign, we're halfway there by her, saying that she's not Donald Trump, right? She spent a lot of time telling people she's not Donald Trump, and not enough time telling people who Kamala Harris is. And we talked about this an episode two ago, and that's podcasting, right? And in the changing landscape, and I know I'm preaching to the Dave Trafford choir here, but that's where it is. And I think it was a tactical error to not do Joe Rogan. I think she missed an opportunity, an authenticity opportunity to just have that conversation, that 3 hour long podcast that whoever gets through all that, God bless them. But so it's not about policy, right? Like, you could get into the policies for sure, but it would be more about her and the authenticity. And I think it was a huge, I think it was a big mistake. I think she did some of the right things, but I think, cabbies, the average Joe can't make it to a rally. But they have lots of time in the car to listen to podcasts. And I think, I don't want to go over what we have already talked about in the past, but I think that was an opportunity missed for sure.
Yeah, I think, Lindsay, when we start to look at that kind of eye contact, in some ways, the GOP strategy just simplified things. Whether you like the message or not, it didn't matter. It was easy to ingest and digest. You might want to throw up a little bit in your mouth, depending on who you are, but it was a lot easier than trying to figure out what lane the Democrats might have been in.
They told a story that was astonishing. They used the words, our nation is an occupied nation, right? They used war language to describe the state of the United States right now, when the realities over here, they're in some of the best financial, best job employment, best minimum wage environment that they've been in its history. But the narrative is about fear, that you're losing something that you think you have, that you've lost something that you thought you had, right? And they tied it in a nice bow. To your point, they connected the dots. And they said, we're at a point of such risk that if you go with her, the woman who's just going to trottle on, use big words, big sentences, we're going to get nowhere marginally fast. And I'm going to double down on the word action, right? Like, Trump is action oriented to the point of, I don't know what I'm going to get, but I'm going to get something, and I'm going to roll the dice and hope that what he's going to do is going to be so marginally other than where we are right now, it's going to benefit me. And I think that's the way he talks to a lot of cohorts and constituents. He breaks them down, finds their fear, and says it's going to be better with me. Take that risk, take that chance.
Well, and when we start to look at this, and here's the challenge, I think that media is going to have, a larger challenge that the Democrats are going to have, and that is to say, we respect the outcome of this election. Everybody puts their hand up, and that's good. We're all breathing a sigh of relief from that perspective. As a footnote, it will be Kamala Harris who presides over the joint session of Congress and the Senate that will actually certify this election come January 6th, but that's just a minor thing. Right? I'm just saying. So to appear, and as we record this, the vice president has not yet made her concession speech, but we expect fully that she will today. The Democrats are going to have to, at one hand, say, yes, he's the president, we move on. But at the same time, you can't kind of backtrack, Bob, on all of the accusations that they have made, the fears that they have brought up about a Trump presidency. I find it hard to believe that he's not going to have, this massive deportation. He's not going to bring in the tariffs he promised. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. All the other questions about going after his political opponents. It's not in his DNA to say, I was just kidding, right?
Right. Yeah. He's really going to do that stuff. Make no mistake. And I think he'll move pretty quickly on it. To your point about the Democrats, they got to figure out who they are and where they're going to go. I mean, this was a colossal defeat for them. Let's remember, they were the incumbent party. They had tremendous momentum out of the gate when Biden stepped aside and Harris took over as the nominee. So there was a lot in their favor that they weren't able to capitalize on, and they weren't able to connect with grassroots America that elected Donald Trump as the next president. The Democrats have become the elitist party in the U.S. And if you just look at the endless number of maps we saw last night, you can draw a blue circle around every major urban center. But as soon as you get outside of that, it changes. So the Democrats have to do a fundamental retool. They have to come to a new understanding about how is it they communicate to and connect with that heartland rural voter that Trump has done such a good job of capturing and connecting with. That's what the Democrats need to do moving forward. They have to figure out what are the dots, like you said, Dave. They were connecting the wrong ones during this campaign. So what are the right dots, and how do they connect them, and how do they get there?
And can I add on that? Because Bob, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the Democrats being perceived as the elitist party. But also, and I don't know if you guys saw the New York Times piece earlier this morning, but when they calibrated some of the numbers, Trump's margin increased in over 2,300 counties. Like, his on the ground efforts in, I'll call them suburban rural counties, through the roof. So to your point, Bob, what is the Democratic narrative that's connecting with that population? I don't know. I don't know, but they've lost all of the amazing roots that they had historically with those families. So that's what has to be rebuilt. Hit the nail on the head.
Well, even in terms of rebuilding, I mean, let's not forget that the Senate swung to the Republicans last night as well. It looks like the House is on track to do that. And even if it's not, it's going to be so close, it'll be very difficult for the Democrats to do anything, even to hold legislation up in Congress. So what happens there? I mean, if we look at it a week from now, Anne-Marie, we have Trump as the Republican president with the Republican Supreme Court and a completely Republican Congress. There's little he can't do.
Exactly. And I think that's probably scares me more than anything. And emboldened and empowered, both of those things, Trump really does scare the shit out of me, because I think he is going to do it. He has 4 years to play around and do anything he really wants to do. And I think there'll be all kinds of immediate consequences. If you're an NGO in the US, forget your funding. I think you've lost it. It's going to end. We're coming to, as soon as he's in power, those are kinds of things they'll do. He's going to right away make sure that he is pardoned and that he can seep into the states where he's got charges, all those different charges he's got. Keep in mind, in sentencing and all kinds of things, he'll be focused on getting rid of all of his legal troubles. He'll be, he really doesn't have, as you said, anything to stop him or hold him up. So I think he's just going to start doing the things he always wanted to do with as kind of as he always did, but now even much more emboldened and empowered.
Well, I just did a fact check this morning, and it was June of 1215 that we had the Magna Carta was established in the UK, and that's when King John just decided that kings and governments were not above the law. But here we go. I'm predicting we're going to have a hashtag MAGA CARTA 2025. And I'm only being half facetious on this. right? Because I think it was very deliberate, clever for him to distance himself from Project 2025, and the media never really jumped on that. They just kind of went along. What do the polls say? What do the polls say? What do the polls say? And they talked about it a little bit, Brad, but there wasn't enough kind of connection there. They stayed pretty quiet. So I think that there was a message to the guys at the Project 2025 saying, shut the fuck up. Just be quiet. Sure. Sit aside. Now, how many meetings are going to happen in the next week with those guys? And they have to be taken seriously. So I go back to the beginning, where in 2016, we didn't see that coming. The Trump team didn't see it coming. So they weren't prepared really to govern. They have been working on this hard for months. They're ready. And they're going to put people in place who are, you know, a little scarier than the first crew we saw.
And he has said, they have said that the party has said that he is not going to surround himself with the John Kellys and Mark Millies of the world who would keep him in check. You know, the adults in the room as his first term as president sort of went. That he's going to surround himself with the Stephen Millers of the world. So yeah, it is kind of frightening from that perspective, because he's threatening, you know, some pretty basic principles that this country prides itself on. So the other thing though is he told America who he was. He didn't mince his words. He told people who he was day in and day out. And Americans yesterday said, well, all good. We don't care. We care about the economy. We care about the border. And they're not taking him seriously. Or they don't take what he says seriously. And I think there's a check and balance now that, as we noted, if the Senate has swung Republican, if the House remains Republican, we know how the court is currently stacked. So, and then now the executive branch, what's he going to do with the DOJ? There's a whole lot now we don't know. Lots of speculation, all sorts of things will be written between now and January 20th, and sky is falling, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really super hopeful that you know, because he is so mendacious, that none of this will come. A lot of this won't come to pass. That he just said a lot because he's such a great con man, that he conned the American people into voting for him so he can stay the hell out of prison, and that it will be pretty much status quo. There will be some things he will do that will be quite egregious and outrageous, but by and large, I remain hopeful that it remains in check. Maybe call me naive, but.
Well, I think the phrase around yesterday was nauseously optimistic. So we're still, some of them still suffering from that. But I mean, Bob, I hear that, and that makes mature, obvious sense. But here's my issue: is this is not about Trump anymore. This is about the momentum of the movement that is Make America Great Again, and. We can remove Trump from that. The movement is going to continue with a good deal of steam behind it. So with or without Donald Trump saying, I want to do this, you're going to have all kinds of members of the movement who are going to actually push some of this forward.
Yeah, as a result of what transpired last night, MAGA is now the heart and soul of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is no longer what it was under even recent previous administrations. It has now been fundamentally redefined to be the voice and the vehicle of that ilk of Americans. And Trump didn't create them. I said this in 2016. Trump didn't create what we saw in his first government, but he did unleash it. And now he's legitimized it in that movement has now decisively elected a president, and elected one who was fairly disgraced as a former president. So the power of that movement and its ability to wreak havoc and fundamental change is one of the frightening outcomes of this, because it has no guardrails around it. Right? Harris campaigned a lot about, imagine Donald Trump in the White House with no guardrails. Well, now you've got the whole MAGA nation without guardrails because they won, and they won handily.
Yeah, Lindsay, this wasn't about just electing him and giving him a mandate. The American people gave MAGA permission.
Everything I was ever taught in high school or in university about politics and leadership was that the assumption is it's a rational player, especially in the West, right? Everything about it was so. Where we are now is the opposite of that. Like you look back to the various Bush administrations, like that all seems like, remember, we were all like erupting with emotional responses and the impact that was going to have. That era seems immensely rational and predictable almost, like despite all the chaos and wars. Where we are now, you're right. Like what he does or doesn't do is one thing. But what he has done is is able to now do is he's now able to enable people who are not rational, who want power, who are online crazies, who think they have now the right to do certain things. And it is worrying across the board. And it's worrying across the board on parts of the story we haven't even yet touched, right? Female rights, female reproductive rights are, regardless where you sit on the argument, these women's lives are now at risk. And I'm gonna, we now, I feel, have to stand up and start talking about this more objectively. The lives of, I don't know how many of thousands upon thousands of immigrants, their lives are at risk because he's enabled people on the ground to act in a way that is outside of the law. And I know that may be, I don't know, a more extreme, fearful view of this, but that's what exists. And I think it exists in a very objective way. What happens will be determined, but it exists now in an objective way.
Well, and dystopia aside, I mean, I was reading The Economist last week. Okay, and you talk about a rational, sort of logical approach. That's pretty good journalism. They're talking about the tariffs, Anne-Marie. They're talking about the various approaches to, NAFTA, or what is now the rejigged agreement between Canada and the United States and Mexico. The question around EV investments and, all the relationship with China. The headline indicating, well, if he wins, we're facing the high possibility of a global recession. So all of the things that he was wagging a finger at the Biden folks over were probably going to be accelerated and exacerbated just based on his America first. And it's going to be really difficult for countries around the world not to get caught up in it. There's no possibility that we here in Canada or the folks in Europe or in Asia or anywhere in the world are going to be able to sit back and say, okay, let them work their crazy shit, batshit crazy out of them over the next 4 years. We'll be fine. There are some serious implications of all of this happening.
Yeah, we have between Canada and the U.S. We do. I think the number is $3.4 billion a day in bilateral trade. So it's a really important big thing. So if he decides to put tariffs, for example, I have a hard time believing it because the trade that the U.S. gets with Canada, especially energy production, is that wouldn't be something he wouldn't want to risk that. But he also believes Elon Musk is just the most brilliant businessman. So it's very hard to rationalize anything. But I think that's why MAGA decided they capitalize again on how people feel. There's a fundamental distrust in politicians, which has seeped down into a fundamental distrust for mainstream media. So those two things they fed into. And so they've been running with somebody that's the anti-politician, where the Democrats ran a politician. She's a politician. She comes across as a very, very skilled, brilliant lawyer. But again, as Lindsay said, in that elite, people, if you're in this elite categories of people that you would relate to her. But Trump is this kind of everyday buffoon that they had for 4 years, and he didn't destroy their lives. They think now, looking back, their lives were better. So I think even though he talks a lot of talk and says a lot of crappy, stupid things, they kind of don't believe it. I think they just know my life was better under Trump. And so that's why I think fundamentally they thought there isn't a risk, even though he says crazy stuff every day. I don't think people just believed it.
I laughed during the campaign when Obama did a couple of keynotes at Harris rallies, and made no bones about how pissed off he was that Trump's mantra was, remember how strong the economy was when I was in office? Remember how well you were doing? Remember how great everything was going? Obama said, yeah, that was my economy. We handed that to him. And now, damned if he's not about to do it again, right? Because as Lindsay noted earlier, the U.S. economy is firing well on so many different levels that has transpired under Biden's initiatives coming out of the pandemic, that's going to continue, and now Trump's going to be able to capitalize on that. And we're in for, if we thought he was narcissistic before, with this victory behind him, the amount of the love that people have for him that he is going to talk about is going to be off the charts.
Well, here's the other side of this, and you know, Anne-Marie already brought up Elon Musk. You know, I can't imagine how the conversation is going to go in 4 years from now. Well, were you better off 4 years ago when you had fluoride in your water, Brad?
Right. Let's make America have polio again, shall we?
Yeah.
Maybe the GOP is now the grand odious party. I'm not sure. This really has a lot of culture war implications to it, I think, and I think this is maybe a bit of a hangover still, and it's going to take more than a few months, I think, for it to wear off and to sort of settle down a bit and really see what exactly is going on. I still, I'm curious to see what if any implication this has for our own electoral politics here in Canada. I'm waiting to for the dust to settle to see what people say about how America did get there. When should Biden have stepped aside? 4 years ago, he said he was going to be I don't know if this is the exact word, but a bit of a caretaker, an interim, if you will, and that he would hand it over, and then he chose not to and waited too long. So all sorts of curious. I have all sorts of curiosity around how we got to where we are. I think the culture war stuff it makes for great, fodder on the likes of Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. There are people like us who follow this stuff every day and very closely and are really tuned into it and have all sorts of opinions. But the average person out there does not. They're not thinking about this stuff every day at all. They're thinking about the cost of a I was going to say bag of milk, but that would probably that would cause some people to scratch their heads who are listening elsewhere. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread. What are the costs of a liter or a gallon of gas if you're listening from the U.S. in America? Those are those real sort of basic issues are what they're thinking about. And really give a whole lot of thought to Trump, and they hear people screaming from the rooftops, and they think that they're overreacting. I don't think they are. I think he is odious, but how far he goes, I guess, is I'm still very curious to see where this all lands.
Well, let's kind of, before we close, I just kind of go around, and this is the reality now, though. I mean, this is where we are. This is what, and I posted on LinkedIn the other day, whatever happens, Americans are going to elect the government they deserve. period. And that happens just generally. I think we always get the government we deserve because that's how we line up at the ballot box, and we are the ones who are responsible for it as the electorate. So here's where we are, Lindsay. I don't think that we can kind of go into a fetal position for the next 4 years. There has to be some way of managing it if there's opportunity in it. I don't know, but there's no way that we can just cower and say, well, we'll go wait for the storm to pass.
No, this is the optimist in me would look at this as an amazing opportunity for an otherwise, frankly, disconnected Canada to come together, right? To find the pieces that are non-negotiables for each of our provinces, rather than finding the areas that split up the different provinces. How do we root in Quebec? How do we root in Alberta? How do we root in the Maritimes so that we're all fighting for one another? That is a result I would like to see and to find the common ground for which is unshakable. That all depends on one important word, which is leadership. And I am not that much of a betting woman. So I'll leave that to others, but I really hope our leadership and our premiers across the country come together.
Well, Bob, with leadership comes trust. So there has to be kind of hand in glove there as we move this thing forward. That we're going to have to trust, whoever's in the PMO at the end of the next calendar year that's going to be able to say, this is how we're going to manage life next to the United States under Donald Trump as well.
And that's going to be an even more key consideration than it always is going into our next federal election cycle. Who can deal with Donald Trump for the next 4 years? Justin Trudeau is not that guy. He did okay with Trump the first time around, but then he pissed him off. And Trump has no time for those who piss him off. So it's going to be fascinating to watch how Ottawa deals with this and moves forward now. If they're smart, they won't have Trudeau as their point man in terms of dealing with the U.S., of dealing with the administration. I'm not sure it's Chrystia Freeland either, but it certainly shouldn't be Justin Trudeau fronting Team Canada as we try and move forward now and grapple with the inevitable bilateral issues that are going to be brought into play by a reelected Donald Trump.
Well, Brad, we could dust off Chrystia Freeland's "What kind of Canada do you want?" speech. I mean, I think there's some legs there, but I think Bob's right. We got a bit of a dilemma on our hands.
We do, and I certainly am not going to sit here the morning after and make any predictions on what that ought to look like, or I don't know. I think it's just, let's see what happens. I think, I don't not to keep beating this drum, but I think we just need to pause a little bit and just reflect and watch and see how all of this starts to unfold and what he actually does and says, and be ready in some way, shape, or form to respond and react. I don't think that the Liberal Party of Canada is going to form the next government regardless of what happens. So maybe what we need to do, and maybe what we need to hear, is some really sound policies from the Conservative Party of Canada in terms of what their plan is with respect to, say, the economy and immigration, because I don't think we've heard anything yet on that front.
Yeah, well, whatever we hear from the Tories, Anne-Marie, I think that we should not be surprised at anything that comes out of the Trump White House.
No, I don't think, and I think we need to be prepared to expect anything from a Trump government. But on the other hand, we woke up today, so did Americans, and all Canadians, with the same issues we had yesterday. We're the same worries, the same concerns. We still go to our same jobs. We still worried about the cost of our groceries and about getting affordable housing and so forth. So most of us are worried about the same things today. We have the same issues. But what I hope for is very similar to everyone else, but I also hope that our politicians and leaders are paying attention to the lessons learned, I think, and doing some analysis of what happened. And because I think similar things are happening here in the grievance politics, the rage politics, all of that. To Brad's point, we need to get beyond that. Yes, we're all pissed off about the economy, but how are we what are the actual fixes rather than this person is just going to fix it for me? What are the actual policies that in place to help to that end without trying to pacify us with easy fixes? We all want that. We all want an easy fix and don't want so much change. We just want it fixed.
Dave,
it's not reality.
Yeah.
Dave, if I can, the one thing that we haven't spoken about, and maybe we leave it for now, but is Russia and the Ukraine and NATO, and I think that honestly, that is the one thing that does really truly worry me, is security of what is happening over there in Europe. That is, I think, a real unknown that we should be paying very close attention to.
Great segue
Here.
into our wrap, because here's what I want to tell people. As we record this on the 6th day of November, we're preparing to do a Now and Next live. And we're going to be at the Public Affairs Association of Canada in Toronto. They're having their annual gathering at George Brown College down on the lakeshore. I'm just excited to go and see the new building at the campus because it's built out of mass timber. It's wooden. It's the coolest thing, right? So I'm quite excited about that. So we've convinced the crew here. We're all going to gather for our live version of Now and Next. So we'll have to put that on the list of things to talk about, because I think that will pique the interest certainly of the audience in the room, and we hope certainly the folks who subscribe on YouTube or listen on the various audio platforms, Apple and Spotify, etc. So if you are watching on the YouTube, subscribe. That's great. If you've got a comment, awesome. But we really would like to hear what you think about the show. So if you want to leave us a talk back message, you can do that. Speakpipe.com/now and next. I'll leave the link in the show notes for you. But we've just kind of launched this, so we're actually interested to see what you guys have got to say. So whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple, Spotify, etc., you're able to jump in and leave us. And I guarantee you, highly likely, that if you leave us a message, we'll include it in part of the programming coming up. So that's just good fun. So it's speakpipe.com/now and next to leave us a talkback message. So Brad Ross, thank you. It's always good to see you and talk to you. Anne-Marie fucking Akins, I think is what we were hoping to say this morning. Bob Reed is here. And of course, Lindsay Broadhead bringing her insights and humor to the whole show. Thank you for listening and watching. We are having a great time just kind of watching how this audience has developed, specifically since we launched the show in a video form. Those of you who are longtime subscribers on the audio platforms, thank you for hanging in there. We know that just makes life simpler for you to fire it up and listen in the car, as Brad says. So it's been a real kind of eye opener, and nice to be able to reach the audiences where you are. So next week we are going to go live. We're not going to actually produce that show for next week. We'll put it out a little while later for you, just so you can have a hint. So if you're not part of the Public Affairs Association of Canada conference, you can listen in once we drop that. But next week we're going to get more into, I think, some of the security issues that Brad brought up. I'd be curious to hear what some of the security brains who are friends of the show have to say about the next steps. And I think it's time for David Schultz to drop in on the show because it will be the aftermath. He is the political scientist from Hamilton University who has been on the program since, well, I guess Trump's trip down the escalator back in 2015 when he declared that he was going to be a candidate. So great to get David's perspective. So that'll be next week here on Now and Next. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Erin Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.